Great. Well, thank you for the nice introduction, Sarah, and thank you all for coming. It's great to be here. I started studying mountain lions about 15 years ago in the Santa Cruz Mountains, in an era which my teenage boys refer to as the olden days. And the decade before that, I had spent studying the ecology of newly reintroduced wolves to Yellowstone. And when I came here, and that kind of study was like mostly how large carnivores have been studied to that point in large national parks or protected areas or something like that. But when I got to Santa Cruz, what I really wanted to do was better understand large carnivores that live in the matrix of a more human-dominated ecosystem. Looking at issues of coexistence and how they're able to survive here or not. And so we set out to really, try to understand how humans influence everything from the physiology and behavior of these animals to their ecology and populations and ultimately their conservation and management. And in the early days, we were also sort of developing new tech, so we formed collaborations with engineers at UCSC and in Germany, and we incorporated accelerometers into GPS collars that allowed us to measure how many calories animals were burning. So, sort of like a Fitbit on a mountain lion. And we put mountain lions on treadmills wearing the collars so that we could calibrate the movement of the collar to the amount of calories that the animals were burning. So that then when animals were wearing these collars, out in the wild, we could understand, how many calories they burn when they move around the landscape, where are they going, what is their behavior in different parts of the landscape, and, importantly, how humans affect all that, right? How the location of human houses and roads and activity influence everything these animals do. We also did experiments where we would play the sounds of people talking to mountain lions in various capacities. So, for instance, we can find what these animals are feeding on through this GPS data, which makes a little cluster anytime they stay in a place for a long time. And we can go to that cluster and we can see what the animals are feeding on. And it's usually deer. That's mostly what they eat in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And what we would do is we could get to the deer before the mountain lion had finished feeding. We set up an experiment where we would attach a video camera to a tree, which was attached to an MP3 player and attached to a speaker. And then when the mountain lion came back to feed, we'd play the sounds of people talking, which was like our treatment, and then frogs, which was like our control. And when and the people we chose to speak at them were sort of celebrities you might have heard of, like Rush Limbaugh and Rachel Maddow. And then mountain lions would come back, and when they hear frogs, they kind of look up and look at the speaker and not really react very much. But when they'd hear people talking, then instantly they're out of there. And it didn't matter whether it was Rachel Maddow or Rush Limbaugh. They were totally nonpartisan in their fear of people. And so, we did lots of studies like this. We're tagging animals, doing these experiments, looking at how many calories they burn, looking at their behavior as they moved around the landscape, looking at the kinds of habitats they like to, they had a preference for. Over time, we were able to sort of accumulate data on reproduction and survival and mortality and how these animals died and everything. And it didn't matter what you looked at, whether it was the number of calories they burned or what they killed or where they killed it or where they liked to prefer to stay or where they died or how well they survived. Humans were the most important driver of everything. So, they live in this really human-dominated landscape for them, right? Everything they do is to do with sort of avoiding us on the landscape. and making a living, which they were able to do because, in large part because of groups like the Land Trust that had protected so much habitat in the Santa Cruz Mountains. In the early days of the study, though, while groups like the Land Trust had done a wonderful job protecting land, nobody had really thought too much about connectivity, about how these landscapes are connected to each other. And by putting these GPS collars on animals, we started to see, where these animals in particular were crossing Highway 17, and two sites popped out immediately. One was the Laurel Curve, and the other is by the spillway of the Lexington Reservoir. And I remember going into the Land Trust and meeting with them and talking about the stuff we were doing with mountain lions, and I think a couple of the people who were there back in the day are here today. Terry's here, and Dan Medeiros, and others, and it was interesting. They all started to kind of like look at each other, and they whispered the name of some properties I didn't recognize, and you could see all of a sudden the heads started turning, and I think they had been sort of toying with some conservation in that area, but they couldn't really justify it because it was right next to 17. Like, who wants to acquire property and have people hiking right next to 17 when it wasn't obvious what the selling point would be? But then once they realized that it was super important to connectivity, then my job was essentially done, and the Land Trust just did this amazing job over many, many years of conserving land on both sides of the freeway, engaging with Caltrans and pushing Caltrans to build a tunnel, and that's all happening now, which is really amazing. While the Laurel Curve is incredible and I think will benefit mountain lions quite a bit, the work is not done, right? Because the Santa Cruz Mountains are this habitat island in the Central Coast that's separated from adjacent mountain ranges like the Gavilan Range to the southeast and the Diablo Range to the east by the Highway 101 and all the development along it. And we've done genetic analyses. When we capture animals, we take blood samples. People are doing this elsewhere in the state. When animals die on the road, we can also collect a genetic sample. And so by having genetic samples of animals sort of throughout the Santa Cruz Mountains and across the state, we've been able to look at how different populations are connected or isolated from each other, and also what the health of the population is in their genetics. And what we've seen is that the Santa Cruz Mountains are really isolated from the neighboring ranges because animals, and we can see that in the genetics, because animals aren't getting back and forth to breed with each other. And so the other thing that genetics show is that the population, while the numbers of the animals on the ground might be what you'd expect to have, the genetics isn't very healthy. And we're starting to see the effects of genetic inbreeding. So Florida has this population of mountain lions. There's only a few of them, and they're separated from other mountain lions by thousands of miles. And so there, what they've seen is high rates of malformed sperm, testicles that fail to descend, and this kinked tail, which is, you only see it in animals that are inbred. And so in the Santa Monica Mountains in LA, they've been starting to look at sperm, and they're finding, rates of malformed sperm of like 90 to 95% in the animals down there, and kinked tails and testicles that aren't descending. And we're just starting to see evidence of that in the Santa Cruz Mountains. I got a photo from a camera trap the other day of a mountain lion with that clear sort of kinked tail. So it's really crucial that we connect the Santa Cruz Mountains to adjacent mountain ranges, and I think the most promising area right now to do that is with the Gavilan connection, where the Santa Cruz Mountains meet the Gavilan Range, and there's this area called Aromas right in between those two mountain ranges, and we had a mountain lion go all the way through Aromas, and then basically we're almost sure got hit on the 101 and died, so wasn't able to exchange genes. And then we also collared a whole bunch of bobcats in that area. And what you can see is the bobcats are constantly bumping up against the 101, but never crossing, never successfully crossing. So that's a real hard barrier to mountain lion movement and wildlife movement. And the Land Trust, as I'm sure most of you know, has done this wonderful job of acquiring the Rocks Ranch, which is the northernmost property on the Gavilan side. So we've got the connectivity there and the connectivity coming from the Santa Cruz side. And so now there's more to do with all that, and then also working and engaging with Caltrans to build a tunnel or an overpass. And I'm told that Caltrans is now making steps to do that because of the work of the Land Trust. So I think that's all I have for now, but I will pass it on and happy to take questions later.